So first of all, welcome everybody. My name is Mark Scurrell. I'm a program manager. I'm sort of one of the team that Jason referred to as coming in from the Seattle-Redmond area. I'm sort of part of Jason's overall team. But in particular, I work on the compute stack. So our overall team is responsible pretty much for everything compute-wise in the product group in Redmond. So we own everything from defining the VMs and all the new hardware that's been coming out and will continue to come out, exposing that via VMs and some higher level capabilities as well, like container services, scale sets, and batch, and other things, and some of which we'll talk about today. So it's great to be here, and that's sort of what I work on. I think that I did one of these previously, and it was in Tel Aviv, Israel, so it was a little easier getting here than Tel Aviv. So this is really a sort of foundational, really starting point, as the title says, in terms of, I think it sort of really builds nicely on a lot of what Jason covered this morning. I sort of really want to sort of set some of the foundation, and we'll talk a little bit introductory stuff about some of the sort of the principles and the trust and the security and some of the overall capabilities we provide. But then we'll dig deeper. We'll start going into some of these sort of capabilities, go and create some VMs, look at some of the higher level services and so on. But really sort of set hopefully the foundation for some of the other sessions that you'll go to, and sort of hopefully a good starting point for your journey to the cloud and using Azure. So first of all, I just wanted to check who in the room is actually running sort of production workloads on Azure. Okay, so that's a few. Who's just dabbled or sort of tried? And that's sort of a few more. And then yeah, there's a portion of the room that this will be brand new for. So I'll bear that in mind when we go through. So to really sort of try to explain some of the what you're seeing on the screen, sort of take a little bit more time. It doesn't look like there's any mics, so what I'll do is I'll try to finish a little earlier, and I'll be here after the session if there's any questions. So first of all, actually, there was a conversation earlier on, and people were talking about infrastructure as a service or the platform as a service, and we sort of bandy around the various sort of terms, so I thought it's good to level set on exactly, certainly what do we and sort of interpret those things as, or how do we use these terms. So sort of really here, I think it's sort of pretty good breakdown of all the various levels, all the sort of various capabilities that go into when you want to run an application or applications, what do you need? Everything from the networking stack and the servers and any virtualization layer all the way up to the application, the data, and the application. So it's sort of a pretty good way to sort of think about what's required. And then, with that, you can see that sort of as we move to the right here, sort of the responsibility for an increasing number of those layers, you're sort of putting onto someone else, and Azure in our case. So really sort of this infrastructure as a service, it often is that first step to the cloud, and really where you're sort of handing off a lot of that infrastructure, the sort of physical, the networking, the storage, the actual servers, and the virtualization layer, and we sort of deal with that. But you can still bring, your OS, you can pick your OS, bring your applications, and bring everything above it. And certainly that is, very, very common. Probably in addition to sort of some of the built-in hybrid capabilities to our offerings, probably sort of the majority of sort of the time is, well, let's take what we've got and let's start moving that. Maybe specific applications, specific workloads. Let's move that to the cloud. Maybe bring more and more, and then as we sort of gain confidence, get used to it, understand what's required, we can start looking at some of the other, maybe higher level capabilities. So then there's a number of talks at the conference today and tomorrow where we talk about some of our platform as a service offerings. So these sort of higher level offerings where we sort of, again, take on more of the responsibility and really sort of abstract away a bunch of the sort of detail, the plumbing, sort of the infrastructure that really is not particularly of interest to you. You rather focus on your applications, and what your secret sauce is. But you're going to maybe write that, or you have to modify your application to sort of leverage these extra sort of set of capability, extra layers that we're taking responsibility for. So this sort of talks to sort of the very popular sort of thing like serverless, for example, and abstracting away even the fact that there's sort of VMs there and just running some code or functions, for example, with Azure Functions. And then far on the right, obviously, it's complete software as a service, Office 365, Power BI, and so on. You sort of say is that full software as a service where we sort of take care of everything for you. This is certainly what we the main terms that we use. And in this talk, we'll talk about infrastructure. And as I say, there's a number of other talks where we really dig deeper on some of these higher level platform as a service offerings. So this morning, I think it was Jeff went through the initial view into Azure Portal, and he's going through and he's scrolling through the list. And this sort of, to a certain extent, this is another version of that. So you can really see, hopefully you can make out the various layers. We've got the data center, sort of the hardware, the data center infrastructure, the basics in terms of compute, storage, and networking, this sort of infrastructure as a service. And then everything else sort of that sits above that and uses that infrastructure. And then we've got hybrid and management as well. So, as I say, we're going to really start off at the infrastructure side. And we will sort of dig into a little, one or two of those things in the compute services as well. But there is a lot, there. And quite honestly, I think it is a challenge for us to sort of hear quite a lot of the time. We've got this amount of services, we're adding new services literally daily or weekly, and it's sort of a challenge to, maybe on your point of view, to actually try and keep up with it. Or for the existing services, we're constantly, revving them and updating them and adding capabilities and so on. So, really the sort of Azure.com and some of the system updates and so on is sort of really a great place to go and keep track of this. So Jason showed this, and before we I want to sort of dig into it in a little more detail, because I think it's sort of very important, almost like no matter what we offer, we've really got to get some core fundamentals right and really stick to some main principles that really applies to all the offerings, whether it's 10 offerings or 100 offerings. It's really important for us, obviously, to have that global reach and that capability to sort of cater for customers around the world, obviously ensure it's trusted, and cater for the hybrid scenarios as well. So I'm just going to dig into this just a little more. Jason showed a slight variant of this. So yeah, 36 regions. Literally this year, I think I did a couple of months ago, and the one I did, it was like 32 or 34, and there's another 2 now, and then there's some others coming along as well. So I put the link there. This is, again, on Azure.com and the regions, and so you can see the 36. A couple of these are coming very, very soon, and all the green items are available now. And you can see sort of how spread out they are around the world and sort of what that footprint that we have. Super important, obviously, for being local to your applications and sort of minimizing the network and the communication hop. Super important for that, as well as sort of catering for some of sort of the local, like local laws and data governance and so on. And in some places, certainly in some segments or some countries, the data has to sort of reside in that location. So important for a number of aspects to have this global reach. One other thing, I think it was briefly mentioned, but on these regions, they actually do in the main consist of more than one data center. It's certainly often 2, maybe 2 to 4. It would sort of be common in terms of the actual data centers. So there's actually multiple of these sort of buildings that you've seen, but we sort of make them appear effectively as one region to you, and they've got extremely high communication sort of between them. But they appear as one region. So sort of the number of actual data center buildings that we have is sort of far exceeds this. So for the communication, and sort of part again for the having these is that they are paired. So certainly for sort of disaster recovery scenarios and having constant backups, each region is paired with another region. So for example, with our Azure Storage offering, you can configure that to obviously be highly available within one region, excuse me, and then replicate to another region for sort of disaster recovery cases. So you can there's multiple copies for availability within a region, and then you can have yet more copies in a completely other region for disaster recovery, and that's we have that geo-replication capabilities built in numerous the various storage offerings that we have in Azure. So all of this is backed by pretty amazing network. Some of this was actually fairly recently. I got to be educated about and so on in terms of actually the amount of fiber and the massive investment in networks that we're making. Excuse me, I'm just going to get some water here. But it really is amazing. We've got obviously a lot of our own, an increasing amount of our own network infrastructure and fiber, and then partnering with other companies as well. Obviously, it's a huge investment. So when you're dealing with like undersea cables and so on between continents, you tend to partner on those things. The edge cases are, in the main, all the services are available in the main regions, but there are these edge nodes as well. There's more of those around, and that's for things like DNS. Some of the DNS services, they're run at the edge locations. So another important thing, certainly in especially in some sectors like financial services, banking. Actually, I think Rockwell set this up as well in the keynote this morning. Is in some cases where you need that, effectively you want the cloud, the public cloud, to effectively be an extension of your own corporate network. So you've got to be within that corporate network to access it. You need super high bandwidth, together with the security. That's where we have an offering called ExpressRoute. So ExpressRoute, you work with the various telcos or network service providers, and you basically get this network directly into our, the appropriate regions that we have. And that gives you, really makes the public cloud and Azure really an extension of your network. And certainly in terms of, can provide you pretty much all the bandwidth that you need and low latency. So trust is interesting, and it was touched on this morning, but I think just to really spell it out, there's two main areas there. There's a ton of work, which we'll see in a second, but there's like a ton of work that we do in terms of securing the data centers and the infrastructure, making sure everything's secure and we have compliance and so on, just to really check us on all of this stuff. But then I think, very importantly, we provide increasing number of tools and capabilities to empower you. So for you to check, are some of my firewalls open, or have I applied the security updates and so on there. So we do what we can within everything that we control, and then what we are working on and providing you is the capabilities so that you can effectively check your applications, your VMs and so on there, all the capabilities that you're using. So there's a number of obviously areas there. You dig into that a little, obviously, from the infrastructure, the physical side. Actually, I think it was in the that video this morning and the images from it. Actually, I visited that data center for the first time a few months ago. It was actually last summer. And it was pretty amazing. I can certainly speak from experience on this, things like the security and literally going between building and building and being searched and empty pockets and so on. It was pretty much like going to the airport and through security, literally going through each building. So an amazing amount of security and all the fencing and everything around. Pretty incredible, as well as obviously the scale of it was pretty amazing. So we can secure all of that, and we've got and then we provide the capabilities for you as well. Obviously, in terms of the security center, encryption, role-based access, and so on there. So this is maybe the slightly extended list. I pulled this a month or so ago, literally from those URLs. So this sort of really that expanded list of compliance. Certainly something that we spend a ton of time on. We sort of have a whole team dedicated that works with auditors, and we see what's important, all the various certifications and so on. And that's we work with the various teams to ensure that across Azure, we've got this increasing set of certifications that are important for obviously a lot of businesses, and sort of really provide that confidence in the security and the best practices that we're following. The Security Center, I think this was shown this morning. Again, I think this is like the best example of how it's maybe relatively new, certainly maybe in the last year or so, of something where we're sort of specifically making it as easy as possible for our customers to sort of see, within the realms of, the VMs, the databases, all the other capabilities you're using, are they secure? Have you configured them optimally? Has anyone been trying to attack you? Are you keeping up with your updates? And sort of really sort of take that burden off you and, make it easier for you. Then on the hybrid side, even if you sort of say, well, you're not actually going into necessarily Azure and bringing up lots of VMs or deploying whole applications there, this is sort of really the case where we've got Azure and we've got our existing very, very, very rich set of effectively on-premises, the existing applications, everything from sort of the database, to sort of networking, to disaster recovery, backup, and so on. And in each of these products and product areas, we've said, how can they leverage the cloud, and how can you sort of get value from having having cloud capabilities built in? So from within these existing on-premises offerings, you can leverage the cloud. I think the example this morning was on the database side, extending the tables, maybe I think it was StretchDB. Backups as well, I think with Store Simple and so on, Azure Backup, Site Recovery and so on. There we go, and the storage, Store Simple works with Azure Storage, for example. So you can have these on-premises offerings, still use them, but really start to take advantage of Azure and the cloud. So the other area, and it's sort of interesting when you sort of go across the stack, is sort of it's really sort of, we call it open, or it's really the sort of the choice. In Azure, really, we want to enable you to use, like whatever OS, whatever dev tools, whatever open source framework, whatever ISV or sort of premium applications you want. I really think it's about, expanding the choice that you have and then allowing to use, whatever tools or applications you want in Azure. So this is it's probably actually a pretty small subset now. I think Hadoop and I think Cloudera was mentioned by Rockwell this morning, just sort of one example. But and then as well, the number of VMs that we have now where Linux is deployed is pretty high. So it's just really, again, sort of give you the flavor, and I say this is probably still a subset of what we're doing to really give you that choice. Across the whole stack. There is also a marketplace, and again, this sort of reflects, again, sort of the choice and sort of the open source applications, and as well as commercial applications that we have available. So it was over 4,000 applications in the marketplace. We'll sort of see that in a second. Or in a few minutes, we'll have a look at the marketplace. But this is sort of really a place to go where you can basically get both, if you like, free sort of images, different OSs, and so on, as well as premium applications that you sort of pay a premium for on top of sort of the base Azure costs. So very, very rich solutions marketplace there, and it's sort of growing very, very rapidly. One sort of particular partnership that I think sometime last year we announced and made available on the operating system side was definitely Red Hat. It's definitely a key partnership for us. So this even extends, sort of highlighting this. You can sort of see it there in the portal, and effectively some of the sort of really sort of little deeper linking that we've got with Red Hat, and even sort of the collaborations. So we've even got it to the point for support that the sort of Azure and Red Hat support engineers, there's a group of those engineers that are even co-located, so they can sort of work together on, providing that sort of very best support for, Red Hat on Azure. And then this is a link to show that you can link directly off to the Red Hat portal as well. So just one sort of particular case where we've done a pretty close partnership and tie-in with Red Hat. So I think that's the overview. If we sort of dig into what was towards the bottom of the screen there on sort of these foundational capabilities, it's really all about sort of this compute, the storage, and the networking. So we'll sort of dig into a few of the offerings there, sort of, for each of these sort of main areas. Management, actually, you should also point out, and we definitely will spend some time on management and what we call ARM, or Azure Resource Manager in particular. We'll sort of see an example of that towards the end, and that's really all about being able to deploy sort of lots of resources as effectively a part of a template, and be able to sort of deploy it at once, and also have the reuse of sort of really deploying applications as sort of declaratively, to sort of declare the structure of the applications and be able to deploy them, even in multiple instances of those. So we'll definitely cover sort of some of the management side as well. So one of the things I said at the beginning was our team, even drives the hardware and what's exposed via VMs. So we do have a ever-increasing range of hardware that we support and VMs that we expose. In fact, I think it's one of those things when you compare to a sort of traditional on-premises model, it's definitely one of the values I hear from some of the customers I talk to is, well, look, on premises, maybe we would get the hardware, we might keep it very, very well utilized, but then, we've got that hardware and it's, it's every few years, maybe it's 6 months, but normally it's 1 or more years by the time you can sort of get extra hardware and some of the newer hardware. There is also the case, we'll see in a second, where we also different more specialty hardware. So we have everything sort of more commodity, great price performance, and then for particular workloads, we have sort of particular VM sizes as well. And we'll go into that on the next slide. So various range of VMs, these are sort of more of our commodities from VMs and we sort of name them sort of letters from A, D, F, and G here. You can go to the portal, azure.com, and you can get the breakdown of these. Within each of these families, or there are basically the various sizes. So for example, on D, for example, you can pick, anywhere from 1 core, I think that goes up to like 20 core machines. But it's all sort of the same hardware, but then within that hardware family, you can pick, how big a VM would you like? How many cores, how much memory, how much disk, and so on. So some of the newer sizes, let me just put all those out there. So there we go. So some of the newer sizes, and what I was referring to is maybe more specialty for certain workloads, so some of these VM families. So literally, I think it was in November, we made available the H series. So this is actually a particular area my team we work on. It's really sort of the high-performance compute, the large-scale computationally intensive workloads. And this is sort of, I think these are the fastest VMs in the public cloud currently, very much tailored for sort of fastest cores, lots of memory. And then in particular, we have, this is actually a great example of sort of the catering for some specialized workloads and providing the specialized VMs for them. It sort of has this second network, very high speed, very low latency RDMA network, which is very important for HPC scientific workloads. I think L series actually is coming soon. I think that's supporting obviously lots of local scratch SSD. But I think the one, imagine, if you've been following Azure in any way, in sort of even the blogs, some of the previous conferences we've done, we sort of, again, towards the end of last year, released our GPU VMs, and they've been extremely popular, extremely well received. Sort of really great timing there with all this sort of the emphasis on like deep learning and AI. So we have GPU-enabled VMs as well, and they can be catering for both the compute side and really using the GPUs for compute and some of this sort of learning capabilities, and some of these sort of really intensive simulation algorithms and so on that can leverage the GPU for compute. And then we sort of got another flavor of them for visualization and really being able to run and remote Direct3D, OpenGL applications from a VM. So being extremely well received and very, very, very popular. And I think that's an example as well where we're sort of pretty close to sort of the latest and greatest hardware, and can make that available to you. You don't have to go and buy it. You don't have to wait a few months to get it. You can try it out. Maybe it actually doesn't give you the benefits you need for what you thought. But you can come to the cloud, come to Azure, try it out, and if it works, that's great. Expand your usage of it as much as you need to. But if it doesn't, then you haven't had to buy that hardware. So I think that's sort of the choice and flexibility in what we provide is a huge value over on premises. And then this was mentioned. I haven't personal experience of this, but running SAP, it's sort of pretty mind-boggling, really, in terms of the amount of memory we can expose with these VMs, and again, sort of provide to our SAP customers who want to run SAP workloads. So OLTP, OLAP, but certainly up to 32 terabytes per node, which is pretty incredible. So basically we've doubled the sizes, and literally every month, every 2 months, we sort of really keep up with the latest and greatest, look at what the market wants, where the feedback that we're getting in terms of exposing new hardware, maybe more hardware, more memory on the same hardware, that sort of thing. So we're constantly adding the hardware, and then you can obviously leverage it literally within a few minutes. One thing when it comes to availability is sort of important concept to look at if you're looking at Azure and you sort of dig deeper and put production workloads on there, is sort of the concept of an availability set for VMs. So for a single VM that is backed, the system drive is sort of backed by SSD, solid state drive. Then we have a single instance SLA. I think it was a 99.9 single instance SLA. But really, sort of to get the high 99.95 SLA, you need to use an availability set where you have 2 or more VMs. And there's a little build here. But basically, the idea is if there is, it really caters for sort of 2 cases. Within a rack, we have the physical machines. We have various components for networking, various components for power. And obviously, we have within our data center and then the clusters within there lots and lots and lots, as you saw this morning, of these. So really, the idea with an availability set is it sort of caters for sort of 2 cases. One is if there's some sort of fault. If, on the rare case, there's a network switch goes out, or that, a CPU goes out, or something overheats on one of these nodes, then it's potential that a VM could disappear, just like in your own data centers. The other case is if you want to upgrade, and you're upgrading what's on the VMs, or upgrading the VM, maybe patching it or so on, you need to reboot it. You could end up with a single VM having some sort of downtime there. So with the availability set, what we specifically do is we take these 2 or more VMs and we'll spread them pretty strategically across the clusters and the racks and even within the node, so that if there is that fault, or you're doing an upgrade and you're going step by step within an upgrade, you're going to maintain availability and you sort of minimize any impact there. So sort of for the production workloads and the sort of highest SLA availability sets, important concept and something you should use. So if we've got the compute side, if we look at storage, we sort of have this very rich storage capability with Azure Storage. It actually has multiple offerings, and it's sort of really foundation or sort of really founded on blobs, tables, and queues. But really sort of the point of this for sort of the tables and queues are really used for, when you're a developer, you're building an application, you need that queuing or you need that NoSQL sort of capabilities. That's what tables provide. When we're talking about VMs and having the operating system for the VM and having storage, persistent storage for the VM, that's really where the blobs come into play, which are really the foundation for the disks. So the disks associated with a VM. Well, I think we'll have a look in a second, actually. We'll dig into a VM. So when we create a VM, you can actually choose. You can actually choose effectively standard disks and premium disks. The standard disks are based on the spinning disks, have a certain IOPS there, 500 IOPS. The premium disks are all SSD-based with some caching in there as well. And you can add, I think it's 8, is it say 8 there? 8. Attach eight drives there, stripe them, and so on, and get absolutely massive IOPS and cater for a large scale there. So we've also got more of a little bit up the stack, but more of a service where we offer shares. It's called Azure Files, and then you basically get an SMB file share. So you can, with VMs and a combination of Azure Storage, you can effectively create your own share, create disks and so on associated with it or attached to it. And we also have sort of a files offering, a little bit more out-of-the-box offering there with Azure Files. But obviously, in the bottom there, you need the way to get data in, get the data out, and then some of the, with the networking as well, if you're dealing with on-premises. So Azure Import and Export is literally a way for us to actually ship disks to us, so you can actually take your disks, package them up, I think pretty much FedEx them to the data centers, and they're all encrypted and so on, and then we'll import them and have them, and they'll appear in your Azure Storage accounts. So a really great way. You've got massive data sets, and rather than actually going over the network and doing it, in some cases it's a really nice capability just to actually ship the disks. And then there's the command lines. You can actually, if you're going over the network, AZ copy and command line way to transfer data. And then we mentioned ExpressRoute earlier on for this high-speed dedicated network connection. Actually, there's some other things there. Or one other thing there. There is an increasing amount of providing different capabilities now. Again, in the last year or so, different capabilities for various types of data you had. So if you've got data that's hot, we have sort of capabilities for that. But if you've got the data that's cooler, more reference data or stuff that you need to archive off, we've got some capabilities sort of for cool storage as well, where you pay less for the actual storage space and very cost effective for the storage space, but if you do need to access it and go in and access it, you can. So we're sort of really increasing the range of options there, catering for data you're literally hot and literally using day by day, and also to make it more cost effective for you to have this cold data that you're not using on a daily basis and you need to archive off. So that's the time to less of the sort of theory. We'll have a look at the Azure portal and create a VM. All right, there we go. All right, so I'll try and use my Zoom here. I know that's really, this is going to be small, so I'll try and use the Zoom for you. So if we go to the portal, we saw this morning again. This is my portal. And one of the things, it was sort of touched on a little, I'll just highlight initially, is this dashboard and the customization that's sort of required or that's available to you. So one of the things, for example, I did was actually got I name them all the same, but I've got a Tech Summit specific dashboard, and then I've got other dashboards for just my sort of day-to-day stuff. So it's sort of really nice. You can actually create different dashboards. You can, oops, sorry, I clicked on that. You can, as was showed this morning, you can take things and drag them around and customize it and resize and so on. So you can really customize this experience to exactly what you need and what you need to focus on during your day. So again, for those, there's quite a lot of the room that was sort of new to Azure. So we've got on the left-hand side in the portal, these are sort of the services that I'm interested in, and this is only a subset. Jeff clicked on the more services here. So what I've done is, obviously for this and other things, there's certain services I'm interested in and want really to have quickly available, and others not so much. So what you could do, you go through this list and you basically just star the items that you need, and then they appear by default on the left-hand side. But obviously you can always get to everything here and actually search as well. Anything else on here? So we'll see later, we've got a notifications area here and some other settings. So I can go here and actually create do a new, and we can see, actually this may be a good thing, we can go from here, say new, and go in and pick whatever I need in the various sort of categories, networking, storage, and so on. Let me just, so you can sort of see the sort of categorization that we've got. Just go into any of these, and then you sort of get the drill down list of the specific things. So this is really another, like a view on the marketplace, or I can go to the marketplace in here and actually see everything, and see, recommended VMs, dev test, and what's new, and so on. And say there was over 4,000 items here. Pretty amazing selection. So the other way I can do this, and I know I'm interested, I work on VMs and within a VM context, and maybe actually I want to see what I've already got. This is the VM list. Again, we saw it this morning. If I drill into that, we can see I've got a whole bunch here. Just one thing to point out on this list is we've got status there, and some of them are running and some of them aren't. They're stopped. So what that actually means is as we'll see in a second, we've got a VM, and that's backed by some storage. It's backed by a storage account and basically some blobs on that storage account, which are either the OS disk or other data disks that you've attached. So what you can do is, if you don't need that VM running all the time, or maybe it's part of some you scale out, you scale down, scale up capability, but you want to persist the data. You effectively want to shut down the VM, effectively keep the data, not throw it away, keep the data, and then bring that VM back up later. You can stop it. So in that case, you're not paying for the compute. You just pay for the storage space that you used, which is pretty cost effective. So that's what these stopped ones are, and then I've got a bunch running. So just in preparation for this, we'll see multi-tier later. I've got some multi-tier VMs running here, for example. So that's the list. So from in this list, in the top here, I can do an add. I can say also, just again as an intro, I can refresh these lists. I can pick which columns. I can resize the columns and so on there. So I'm going to add a VM. It takes me into the marketplace, and it's sort of specialized on the sort of compute section. And I'm just going to pick Windows Server here. So even within this category, Windows Server, we have a whole bunch of, we've got some choices here. And this plays to, we can see we've got everything from 2008, 2012, 2012 R2, and then even the new 2016, up with containers. Various images there. We've got sort of more specialized images. Again, this is sort of in more the area I work on a day-to-day basis, the big compute space. So we even have like Windows Server with HPC pack installed, so ready to go, so you don't need to install that later on. Some of these at the bottom here are termed hub. That's the hybrid use benefit. So in that way, you get you effectively can reuse your existing Windows licenses, and therefore, you're not paying for Windows, as well as effectively the hardware. You're just basically paying for the hardware, so you can effectively use your Windows licenses with those images. So let me just pick 2016 data center. So we select that. You get to find out about it. So, for example, if we click on HPC Pack, it's very we get a special we get the description about it there. Any legal terms, who's publishing it, links off to documentation and so on. Excuse me. Deployment model, especially if you're new to this, anyone that's used Azure for a while, there is a previous deployment model called Classic, but we default to Resource Manager, and that's sort of effectively the latest and greatest way, effectively APIs and way to deploy any resource in Azure. So you sort of keep that at Resource Manager. And this is a pretty common experience, what we sort of see here. It's sort of like a Azure Portal version of the wizard. It sort of really tries to guide you through the experience. So we're creating a VM, so we're going to we'll just call it Tech Summit. This is, it was briefly in the other slide, this was sort of, what are you going to base certainly the OS disk on? Do you want to base it on solid state drive or hard drive here? So, depending on what you need, I would say if you're running more sort of production, higher performance applications, you'd want to pick SSD, and we default to that. Maybe you've got some sort of dev test, some things where the spinning media is fine. You can pick that, and I think it's slightly cheaper. So you've got that choice here. So I'll stick to that. Need to be able to connect to the machine, so you enter password and confirm it. Subscription. Let me just talk about that just briefly, again, for those new to Azure. This sort of concept, effectively, it's a hierarchical, but it's a way if you're an organization, you get your Azure account. Within that account, you can have what's called multiple subscriptions. And it's really a container with some, and used as a sort of roll-up for a bunch of data. So, for example, you can maybe have a subscription for different departments in the company, and the bills that we generate are rolled up at a subscription level. So you'll get like a bill for subscription, so maybe there's different budgets and so on, or you want to sort of have the breakout, at least at a high level of spending and so on, so sort of subscriptions can sort of really help you there. They're also sort of the basis for some of the quotas. So if you want to expand like the number of cores that you can use, or some of the other limits, extend some of the other limits that we set by default, then that's all sort of set on the subscription. So that's what we've got here. You can have one or more subscriptions. I've got multiple subscriptions, and I'll just pick this one. And then the resource group, let me just... The resource group, I mean, you can really look on this as sort of like the next level down almost from a subscription. Actually, so there's two main things. It's really a good way to group like all the resources that are required for an application. And actually, we'll even see here for a VM, there's effectively various resources that get provisioned as part of even creating one VM. And certainly when we get into the multi-tier apps, if you're dealing with multiple VMs, databases, networking, storage, and so on, all the various resources, this is a way to group them, first of all, and then you can do things like you can delete the whole resource group, which will clear everything up as well. So resource groups are a very valuable feature. Here, when we create a VM, we can create a new resource group or pick one of the existing ones. And then finally here, location. I'm just spending a little time for this. So the new folks here, and here you can sort of see this sort of global reach, everything from Australia to Brazil to Canada, all the way down to India, Europe, and so on there. So I think North Central is probably pretty close to here. So each stage there'll be some validation. We'll move on. So this is the, again, where the hardware slide comes in. You get some recommendations, and then you can see an overall list. And it's sort of really, the UI guys did a pretty nice job here in terms of, let me zoom that in as well for you. You sort of get to see sort of, first of all, the main characteristics, the differences between them, and then also an estimate of the price per month for whatever has been chosen. So let me just pick a 2-core machine. It's got 7 gigs and so on. Select that. So third thing, a whole bunch of settings here. A lot of this you can basically just leave by default. As I said, the VM and certainly the disks that are used by that VM are in a storage account, and by default it's creating a new storage account for those disks for me. Sets up default networking for me. I can dig into any of these. I will go into the extensions here. So this is sort of one important concept. This is sort of a concept where you get that raw image. It's an Ubuntu image, CentOS, it's Windows, whatever it is. And that's that raw base image, but then there's some software that you really want applied on top of that each time. And there's some sort of fairly useful fundamental software that needs to be on, you really want on that standard image. So you can see that list here. It's almost like, in some ways, it's almost like a marketplace, really, for these extensions, which are incrementally applied to the base image. So we can see here, for example, some of our integration, Puppet and Chef for configuration management, custom scripting, so you can run custom scripts whenever the VM starts, and so on, and then various security things. So if I pick the anti-malware from Microsoft, again, you sort of get that marketplace experience with the description, links. And then you sort of get any extension-specific configuration. And I'm just going to leave that at the default. So you can add one or more, 0 or more extensions to your VM. Here's where the availability set comes in. I can create a new availability set. If I had one here, I could add this into that availability set. Various monitoring, and then also the diagnostics, things like the event counters and so on can get logged, and they need to be written somewhere, so they again can get written to a storage account, and you can then go and query that data later on, view it in various tools. So there we're basically done. Does a validation, gives you a summary, and should hopefully go through. So there we go. So we come back. It's taking me back to the main page, and so we can see here this is deploying. Probably just take a few minutes. So just what you end up at the end of it, I sort of got all good cooking shows or kits shows, making things. Here's one I did earlier. So we can see here actually some of these diagnostics and these monitoring here exposed for you nicely in the graphs. You can see that we're sort of part of a resource group. Various settings and so on. We can go and attach other disks and so on to this. And let's just go into the resource group just to show you some of the other things that are created at the same time. So this one actually created a TechSummit availability set. I've got the storage accounts, the networking, and then the actual VM itself. And then on the VM itself, sorry, I'll try and remember to do this. This is where I can stop it. That takes it into that deallocated state. I can just delete it, throws everything away, including what's on storage. And then I can also connect to it. So just right from here, I can do a connect. Basically open the RDP. That might be okay. Yep. And now I'm into my VM. This is sort of the IP address. So, I can right-click. This is 2016, so I can see I've got 2016. It was 7 gigs of memory and so on there. So basically just that's my VM. So that's creating a VM. As I say, this is the monitoring as well, so you can keep track of it. You can create a whole bunch of rules and alerts and so on, tie in with some of the monitoring tools shown this morning as well. So it's sort of very rich in terms of monitoring it. All right. So hopefully, especially for those new to Azure, hadn't even played with it yet, hopefully that gives you sort of a little bit more depth from what you saw this morning. I'm going to go through some of this sort of fairly quickly. There's some sort of concepts or thoughts around, if you've got your existing VMs and images, you can move those to Azure. So if you have Hyper-V, you can deploy those images on Azure. We sort of cater for custom images, so you can create your VHDs and then use those to create your VMs. Certainly see that used in the case where you don't want a stock image and then install a bunch of software on it, including the extensions. So certainly, again, in the sort of space where I am and the workloads I deal with, customers often want to, you need to get an image, Windows or Linux, install a whole bunch of software on it. Maybe the OS needs to be configured. Maybe the software requires a reboot. So instead of going through all those steps every time the VM comes up, they create an image, and then you can just basically invoke that image. So that was that. And then on the networking side, we sort of pretty much covered that, but and hopefully you saw that when I was going through the resource list. The networking is set up, networking components. We'll have a look at a template in a minute. You get to set up all the network rules, the firewall rules, and so on there. So and that way you can sort of gate the access to that, to your VM or to your group of VMs. There's the on-premises connection with ExpressRoute, and you can set up VPNs and so on there. And then also like authenticate and get with these machines with AD. And there's Active Directory, Azure Active Directory integration there as well. So ARM is something we're definitely going to see a little more in a second. So this is sort of really enables application management. So if you've got, we'll see a 3-tier app in a minute, and you've got multiple VMs, layered appropriately. You've got databases, you've got front ends. Maybe you've got, you've got to set up the networking. You want specific network rules between the locations. What Azure Resource Manager lets you do is effectively declare that configuration, sort of declare that almost like that layout, and then set that up and say, okay, well, deploy this in one go, and it'll go through and deploy everything for you basically in one go. And then you can also go in and you could maybe if you want to, you've got that application, you want to run it in multiple regions. Again, you can just take that effectively that template and then use that in another region to deploy the application. And then even when you're and then that can go to a resource group. If you want to clear everything up, you can delete the resource group. So the Azure Resource Manager is sort of the center of this. Everything in Azure you see has what's called a resource provider, and the Resource Manager talks to the resource provider to create VMs, to create various accounts, and so on there. Supports role-based access control. So we'll see that coming up shortly. So typical starting points in terms of what do people use this sort of base infrastructure for. There's a number of things, but we're really going to focus on sort of these 3 main areas. I'll sort of take a look at them. Actually, mainly the sort of the dev test and the line of business apps. But there's a number of typical starting points where we see people using this our infrastructure. So for dev test, we've got a specific capability, dev test labs, that we've created. I'll show you in a second. Because there's so much use of the cloud and of Azure basically for dev test, 50% basically use of that. And obviously it's got some really great advantages to use the cloud for these workloads in terms of really sort of the elasticity and get resources when you need them, throw them away, and not pay for them when you don't. The scale as well, be able to test at a large scale by leveraging the cloud, something that might be a bit more difficult to do, with physical hardware. I think and really across the board, using the cloud for really a pay-as-you-go and leveraging that elasticity is really what really good value and good value proposition that I see customers using. So we've got a very specific offering in Azure and in the portal for dev test. I'm going to go through this actually fairly quickly. I think you'll see it's relatively explanatory. If I go back to my homepage here, and then go down the left, I've got a Dev Test Labs. Click on that. Hopefully I can click on that. No? Maybe I can't click on that. Let's do a refresh. It says I've got a network. All right. There we go. That VM, I don't know if you noticed that pop up there. Yes, right in. That just popped up. You have the notification area there, so that VM and the networking and so on just got deployed and finished. So you can see I've got a dev test lab here. I'm not going to create one. I'll just go into this and really get some main concepts over. So the first thing that you might want to do is, or you're definitely going to do, is go in and sort of configure this and probably set some constraints. How many machines, what images, how many machine cores can the end users leverage. So sort of the first area sort of to go into really is down here in the admin and the policy settings. So for example, you can sort of see, well, what are my VM sizes? And certainly for dev test, if you've got like at one end of the spectrum, maybe our A series, very good price performance VMs, and then maybe at the other end, we've got our ultra high-end HPC VMs or GPU VMs. You really want to sort of restrict what people are using. So for example, there's policy around what are the allowed sizes. You can enable that, and once you've enabled it, you can sort of pick the appropriate sizes here. So I can add in a few more there and save it off. So what VMs, how many VMs per user, what's my total number of VMs that can be allocated for this particular lab. One critical thing, I sort of hear this is something always to be careful of, this has sort of come across this a few times, is as you'll see even with one VM, and then we've got capabilities that allow you, as hopefully you see at the end, to create lots and lots of VMs. And in sort of particular stuff I work on, we've got some capabilities that easily let you create thousands and thousands of VMs. You want to be sure that you don't create them and then go away and forget about them. And probably particularly here on Dev Test Labs, if you're dealing with tens, hundreds, or even thousands of these VMs, you probably want to be sort of pretty careful and manage your costs, and again, pay for use. So for example, you can auto shut down the VMs here and say, at a certain time, I'm going to shut these down. Do I want to send a notification, and so on. And then maybe just to get things ready and started, you can have an auto start as well. Just on the config side, you can do things like restrict the marketplace images. I think I did this for just some of the Windows VMs, for example. But you can basically see the various marketplace images here, and you can choose what you want to allow to be configured. Again, there could be a price implication for some of those. And then finally here, I've got my machines. So for me here, I can add my where's my users? There's policy. You've got VMs, you've got your users there, so you can add the users, who's got access to this, who can create VMs, who can use VMs, and so on there. And then what the users will see is basically their set of virtual machines. So this is actually a perfect example of the auto shutdown, because I actually created this yesterday, and it was all up and running and so on. And then just before this, I took a look at it, and it was shut down, because it was shut down this morning, and I had opted out of the auto start. So hopefully you can see here, dev test is a super popular workload, and here, this is an example of something, a higher level capability that we've built on top of that foundational level, and very sort of specifically for this dev test workload. So obviously, we saw the marketplace, but obviously we have first-class support for all the Windows all the Microsoft applications there. Got the big list there, as well as our major ISV apps from the likes of Oracle, IBM. We talked about SAP and Red Hat and so on there. So obviously, we want to be able to enable you to leverage your applications, whether in the marketplace or not, on Azure. So if we go to the sort of next level from the VM and the single VM, obviously, that's useful on its own, but there's obviously a lot of applications that are multi-tier, require multiple resources, VMs, networking, and so on. So let's just take a quick look at a multi-tier app where we have a front end, like the application layer, and then, the back-end network. So we have various load balancers, we have various networking rules and so on, and then people coming from outside to be able to access this. So we need to be able to, what's it take to deploy an application like that, something more than a single VM. So my starting point there, let me bring up my browser and actually start off on azure.com. And one starting point for me here, I can start from scratch and I can create one of these templates that we'll see. But there's a set of resources, there's a pretty large set of resources which can act as a great starting point. And you can really leverage, great work that, say, other people in Microsoft have done, or even other people have contributed on the community side. So you've got a set of resources, and we have some templates. So we can go here and have a list of templates, and we can see a bunch here. We've got Cloudera, some Chef integration, and so on. 448, it looks like at the moment. But I know if I search for multi-tier app, there actually should be, there we go. There's a couple here. So in this case, if I select that, I can get a nice description of it, but here we have basically this 3-tier application. It's got network service groups, it's got internal load balancers, an app gateway, and so on. So for each one of these, so we have a nice description, and then we'll go into the parameters in a second. But it gives me this option to browse it on GitHub. So you can actually see here, what we do is we provided this location on GitHub where Microsoft, we contribute these templates, but anyone can contribute these templates, and it's been a great starting point for you, and a great way to sort of reuse the work from others and not start from scratch. So we can see everything has a README and the various JSON files that are backing this. If I sort of go one level up, you can sort of just give you the idea of the 400 or so, 400 to 500 of those templates are listed there. So if I go back, I can sort of browse that, I can get at the source, but here's sort of the main thing. If I think this is useful for me, I can deploy it, and I can hit deploy right from here. So this then basically takes that template, takes it from the repository on GitHub, and basically passes it to the portal to deploy. So we can see here, it goes here. And sort of the key thing here on these templates, we'll see in a second, is it just presents me with what the template author has said. Look, these are the set of parameters that you need to provide. I'll handle all the other sort of complexity. This is the set of parameters that you need to provide, and I'll do everything else. And you get an idea of that by, if you use the edit, you can sort of go into this part of the portal where you can see it sort of gives you the main sections. So if we look here, for example, and I'll zoom this in for you. Here we start dealing with storage accounts. So there's basically, here's all the properties that are required for the storage accounts that are required here. And there's other sections for the networking and the database and the VMs and so on here. That's all in here. And this is a fairly big template. But the nice thing about this is, if you look at the parameter section, this is where the author can just say, look, just expose, it might be literally no parameters, or it might be a handful of parameters to whoever wants to use it. So if we have a look here at like new storage account name, new DB name, just see some of these parameters. If we go back exit out of that. You can sort of see them the UI is prompted for them here. So what it does is it generates this UI for me. So there's only a few things I need to fill in here. Multi-tier 1, let's just do that. So I need to specify a resource group, what location. We need some storage accounts for the VMs as well as the database. There's going to be some database on here. I need my login for the VMs. And then I think everything else is provided. I've got my VM size. I can change that if I want. I can change the number of the capacity here. I go down here and say, I agree. Purchase. And that started, the deployment has started. And we get a notification here, say, OK, so that deployment has started and it's in progress. And then I get another one when it's finished. So just what do I end up at the end of that? Basically as a resource group. So this will just give you an idea. So for this multi-tier application, then here in the resource group, you can see all the various components. So we can see the virtual machines for the database, the app tier virtual machines, the gateway, and so on. So a little bit of a whirlwind tour through sort of the template, but hopefully you can sort of see really the value there. Highly recommend you if you're starting your journey with Azure and applications, have a look, leverage the template section here under resources, templates. Take a look at that, and that can really great to help you evaluate as well the platform and get started. All right, let's see if I can squeeze one other thing in here. So finally, I wanted to give you, to a certain extent, it's near and dear to my heart. I spend quite a bit of time on here. This Azure Batch was an example of one of those high-level capabilities that is built on compute-focused capabilities that's built on the infrastructure. So it's sort of a higher-level platform as a service offering. And again, I mean, it's similar to a dev test, I suppose. The experience we got there was very much focused on a particular workload, developing or testing. Here, we have another offering which is very much focused on like the asynchronous processing or batch processing for large-scale workloads and really scaling out applications for certain scenarios. So really the main area, some representative scenarios are around things like transcoding, encoding video, encoding audio, rendering an animated movie, for example, and rendering each of the frames, all the way down to like optical character recognition with customers there in terms of, people are submitting you images and you want to create a document version of that, you need to run through an optical character recognition application, takes the input, does all the compute, and basically spits out the text, maybe to go into a search, the search service, for example. So anywhere where you've got these like asynchronous processing of these and run these applications at scale, this is a case of a service that can help, and we've built on top of our compute stack. So it's really all about getting the app. Get the VMs. You need the applications, whether it's the OCR app or the transcoding app. Actually, in this case, get the VMs that you need, put the applications on there, and then have a queue where you can submit your in this case, transcodes, and it will run the transcode. So I could submit like 100,000 transcodes here. Maybe I've got one high-quality source, and I'm creating 5 different resolutions at 5 different bit rates. So there's like 25 variants of each video I want, and I can fire all these tasks at batch, and it'll process them for me. So really, it's if we looked at IaaS here on our VM offering, if you were doing this yourself, there's a whole bunch of work, but this is where we provide this higher level capability. So just in the last couple of minutes, I'll just show you, and this talks a little bit to the some of this scale as well. So again, I'll go back to my portal. I've got my batch accounts here. I've got several various places around the world. So for this account, so there's a couple of main capabilities. So the first thing that I showed you talked about there was getting the VMs. And we've sort of seen a little bit, we've seen getting individual VMs, we've seen the templates, and dev test labs. And with batch, where these sorts of workloads might need anywhere from 5. In some cases, there's a screenshot in a second, I've gone up to like 20,000 VMs. You can really leverage the massive, massive scale that the cloud gives you. So the concept here within batch is of a pool. So the first thing we need to do is create a pool, the set of VMs. So we can see, we specify information. So we can say, we'll just call that, give it an ID. I won't go through this configuration in detail. I'm going to get Windows VMs. I'm going to pick my node size. This should hopefully all very familiar. I'm going to pick this one. It's just a single core machine. And then here's sort of an example of sort of the higher level experience. Here I'm going to select 300. So I'm going to create 300 of these VMs. I'll leave all the other settings and click OK. So we've created a pool, and in just over a couple of minutes here, it's actually going to create the VMs for me. So just while it does that, just let me go back here. So we have a pool. We can see it here, the Tech Summit, and it's resizing at the moment. So we'll come back to that. The other thing, just to highlight, you often want, similar to the extensions, ways to get the applications onto the VM. So in this case, you can upload basically these zip files. We also support like containers, custom images, actually is coming soon. Various ways to get the applications onto those VMs. So that's what applications is. And then when you submit the work, hey, look, I want to run my 100,000 transcodes, you can submit a job. And then you get sort of the job list here. So let me just go back to the pools. Hopefully, if I select that, this should come up shortly here, and we'll start seeing it resizing. So I'm going to submit a job. So actually, here we go. So I asked for 300. This will refresh every 2 seconds. So it says I've got 200 now, but it's sort of still going. We'll sort of keep an eye on that. So there we go, 250. So literally, this was probably under a minute. We've effectively allocated those VMs, and they're starting to initialize. And we can see them moving through the state change here. So I'm just going to go to my, I've got a command line I can submit from. And then sort of this quick thing, I just want to show you, what am I going to run on those VMs? And this is a hello world for batch. And all I'm going to do, just to show you something happening and these VMs light up, is actually not even use anything installed. I'm just going to perform a ping on here. But you can see I've got, again, a nice template here. I can specify with no code the command line. I can specify from parameters how many tasks I want to run. And then it's going to run this command line. And it's going to do so many pings and so many pings to a particular host. So we can see in my parameters, I'm going to default some of these. I'm going to do things like 20 pings, and my host name is going to be localhost. So here, what I need to do via the command line, so Azure Batch, job create, there's a template, job ping. So I can run that. I just run this from the command line. This is the Azure CLI, obviously available on Windows, available on Linux. Oh, misspelled it. So this is like the non-portal version of prompting me. So I need a job name. How many tasks? I asked for 300. Let's do 400. 400 tasks, and then it's going to submit those and run 400 tasks. So hopefully, as we see here, the gray is idle, and hopefully if this goes through, we should see Okay, so they've gone through. Have I submitted the right name? Oh, no, Text Summit demo. Oh, here we go. Let me. I created my pool, which was called Text Summit, and it's submitted to Text Summit demo. So let's just do that again. 400. I wondered why that wasn't working. So here we go. Thank goodness for that. So basically this, you can sort of see here, literally within, this has probably been 2 minutes. 2 minutes, I've got a good portion of my 300 VMs, and then within literally a few seconds of submitting this task to run on them, literally within a second of that task being submitted, it's firing up and it's running on a VM. So here, this is the hello world, and it's running a ping on the local host. This is just to easily be some OCR tasks that take a few minutes, all the way through to some complex Monte Carlo simulation that takes a couple of hours. But I've basically been able to do that, get that scale, literally within a few minutes. So I won't pull the deck up, but just to this sort of just give you an example. This is sort of like a client version of that heat map, and this sort of shows you 18,000 VMs with tasks running on about 12,000 of them. So really the point about this is sort of a particular area sort of close and near and dear to my heart, but this sort of really hopefully gets over the scale that's possible with Azure and the public cloud. We've talked about all the regions and data centers within a region, and it's still, hey, look, there's a whole bunch of racks there, but really you can do things with the public cloud now, with VMs directly, scale sets, with something like Batch, where you can really do things that you could never do before, and really do at the scale and then at the elasticity. This sort of 20,000 run, for example, maybe is definitely the higher end of the spectrum, but it's very normal for sort of customers to use Azure and some of the capabilities to literally spin up between 5,000 and 10,000 cores at the end of, for 2 or 3 hours at the end of a day, maybe when the markets close, do a whole bunch of simulations and risk and so on, and then shut it down. And so you can really leverage this, both the scale and the elasticity with Azure. So with that, I only got a couple of minutes, but I think that wraps it up. I think the other thing, hopefully you get the decks. I put there's some links to various resources here. And then, as Jason mentioned, there is the Ask the Expert session tonight between 6 and 7, so feel free to call by. There'll be an Azure section there, I'll be there, and a few other guys will be there. So please join us if you can. So with that, thank you very much.